Okay, so I watched Terry Gilliam's Zero Theorem movie as recommended by um some interviewed recently on My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and it reminded me of this book that I bought that I didn't read in, well, like word for word, but it's called One by Orest Orest Bedrij, and he's got a whole chapter on zero in here, but there's some, you know, movie reviews of Zero Theorem. I watched it for free on Roku, which is you just have like some advertisements, I think. But one of the interesting things is he's the basic. It's Terry. One thing about Terry Gilliam is he's from Minnesota, which is where I'm from, but it's kind of like Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is what they call not not cyberpunk, but what's the word for it? But basically you're combining the retro with sci-fi stuff. Um in the well we call it gutter punk in the actual real world, but in the art world it's different term for that. But the story plot was covered in other movie reviews. One interesting thing is they have this virtual tantric thing. I did a blog post on this where I linked the. If you want to watch the movie, I give a link here. Thanks for watching, whoever's watching. But what is it called in the movie? Tantric biometric telemarketing, and the lady who's sent to the main character says it's so tingly, describes it as tingly, and of course this is something I can relate to from the yoga experience, and there's this idea in yoga, especially if you read Gurdjieff, that Kundalini is not the real truth of reality. You also have this as a critique of yoga, like, there's a critique of tantra that it's like a critique of the Tibetan yogis that it's based on misogyny because you're using the female energy. But the viewpoint of Buddhism. Hold on a second here. Give me a second. So the viewpoint of Buddhism is that the truth of reality is not anything materialistic. So it's the nirvana, the void, and this absolute void that radiates light. And through it's an experience of joy also, but it's actually beyond joy. It's through joy. So in the movie, he's hoping to get this phone call that will recreate this experience of joy that he felt, and that actually reminded me of when I first met Qigong Master Chen Lin. Um, I he walked around the class, said he's gonna do healing on us, and um, I could hear his. He said you might hear my fingers moving because he's doing the what they call the Shaolin sword fingers. So he's shaking his fingers. But of course, he has us close our eyes and do the moving of yin and yang. and I just saw this really bright light, but I also felt this immense joy, like this greatest love that I ever felt in my life. And at the time I had a really beautiful girlfriend and she picked me up from class and I just had to admit like, well, the love I felt was better than anything I'd felt with her. And of course, I couldn't like that's awkward thing to confront in my own life. And so I tried to tell her and we didn't we didn't stay together for various reasons. She had a lot of guys chasing after her and she ended up, you know, finding somebody better for her. So which is great. But I went into meditation after that and um so the thing is that like Trini Lin even said he doesn't say very much, but he even said it's beyond love. Like the emptiness is even beyond um love. Usually he says, love's the greatest force in the universe, but on a deep level, the zero, this emptiness is even beyond the feeling of joy or love, and but it's through the heart. So it's kind of a paradox because in order to access the truth of reality, you have to go through the greatest joy. And the irony is that like when people die, they also experience this great joy through the heart, which kind of makes sense because your heart stops when you die, and so it makes sense that you would experience that great joy through the heart, this great love, immense love. And if you watch like near death experiences, they describe this. So I also experienced this through this tantric experience where the tingling that the lady describes. Um, I even had this with a prostitute in Minneapolis who I was sitting in full lotus in fast food restaurants. I was in Burger King, and she came up to me to my booth, and she started dancing by me. And there was a couple ladies on the other side of the restaurant, and they're just like staring at me in staring at us in like disbelievement or like shock or whatever. In my view is, well, this lady can do whatever she wants, as long as she doesn't touch me. And so I didn't think much of it, and she was like dancing next to me in bliss. So I didn't think much of it, and she was like dancing next to me in bliss, and then she finally stopped, whatever. But then, not too much longer after that, I was at a different fast food restaurant. It was kind of close by, same neighborhood. This was a Taco Bell, I think it was, yeah. And same thing happened where, I was in full lotus at a table, and then the same lady, she came up to me, and this time she basically was like sort of like doing a lap dance where she was sticking her backside in my face, and she wasn't touching me, but I just sent energy into her through the third eye. And there was a couple ladies on the other side of the restaurant just staring at us like in total shock, like but so that kept up until uh so like the bliss kept building up between us, like the tingling bliss. And that just kept going on where she just kept dancing in front of me, and then all of a sudden this guy shows up and he's wearing like a purple feather in his hat and a suit, and he's got another guy with him, and she says to him, "Why should I go with you? I'm coming already." And so then I realized, well, yeah, that's her pimp, and that's his John. That he brought a John for her to service or whatever. And anyway, it was an interesting experience, but it's like this is what this Terry Gilliam's movies like, where you have these experiences. But what I experienced was after, like, if you have that if you're in that situation, but it keeps building up over like a couple hours. Actually, like I don't know, maybe like 50 times where you have that tingly bliss building up. Then the heart opens up, and that's what tantra. This is described in an article by Bill Baldry on the limits of tantra. And in terms of Mahayana Buddhism, he says, well, it opens up the realm of bliss, gets emptied out, and then the realm of form starts to get emptied out. And when it starts to get emptied out, that means your heart opens up and you access this like the zero. You access the void through the heart beyond death as a kind of magnetic. It's a magnetic, non-local sensation, and it's very strong, like emotional, joy and love. And then if you get separated from the person, you experience a sense of compassion, which is a sadness, and the compassion's from the lungs. So when you combine the lungs, which is either courage or sadness, so when you combine the courage with the joy of the heart, then you get compassion. But if you overuse the compassion, then you get sadness. um And so that's what happens when you get the separation, through from the love. You get that sadness from the lungs. And the lungs is the yang qi, and the yang qi is what goes to the heart through the right side, the what they call the tiger channel. So anyway, in this book on the zero, this guy actually promoted my work, my master's thesis. I don't know how he was like part of a journal. I think I must have submitted it to this journal or something. And he wrote a little promotional quote about my master's thesis. I have it somewhere. I might even have it. It's in one of my pamphlets, so I could find it somewhere. But anyway, so that's why I ended up ordering his book on zero. He defines one as the 10 to the power of zero, which is kind of interesting. And then he says that 10 to the power of zero equals e to the power of zero, e being the natural logarithm. And then he says that this makes zero like the boundary of a boundary. And this is also what math professor Lou Kaufman just defines zero as zero squared, to zero. And it's the same kind of concept. Um, Voidness must be recognized as representing fundamentally far more than the mind's self-deluded nothingness. And then he quotes the Gospel of Thomas. If they say to you, where do you come from? Say to them, we come from the light, the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself and became manifest through their image. Um, so I don't know. Maybe Terry Gilliam found this book because it's kind of similar to what the movie's about. But um, so the so anyways, connecting zero to one, and like he's getting into physics of the universe and everything. And so like when we think of AI, which is sort of the big deal right now, everything's AI. It's based on matrices math. It turns out that the way AI works is you're doing matrices algebra, but standard matrices relies on what they call the identity matrix. And so eventually, when you have a question for AI, it eventually has to rely on this identity matrix. But the problem is that the identity matrix is like zero squared, where it's fundamentally symmetric mathematics. And the whole secret of the quantum non-locality as quantum biology is that it's not a symmetric um, equation. It's not an identity matrix. So in matrices, you have this diagonal to get the identity matrix for the algebra. and so they call it the off diagonal um, algebra. When you have that off diagonal or non diagonal algebra, that's the non commutative um, time and frequency. And so standard science says, well, it's just a probability, but the Bell's inequality proved that there is this correlation that's non-local. It's superluminal as a correlation. And Jean Brimond, he says, well, this is action at a distance. Um, and so it depends on how information is defined. And Basil J. Hiley, he calls it active information. That's what David Bohm, they both called it, active information. And so based on the time and the frequency, what makes it active is that it's virtual. And by being virtual, it means it's from the future. And so in standard physics, it's accepted that the the magnetic field is from virtual photons. But the standard mathematics, commutative math says, well, that's because it's virtual, it gets canceled out as a like a singularity or basically like an infinity that gets canceled out. But so Basil J. Haley proved that this is wrong. That Richard Feynman and Paul Dirac were using the wrong mathematics based on the wrong physics, and so the quantum non-locality, it can potentially self-amplify into the macro scale, and this is what quantum biology does. And Pascual Jordan was the first to figure this out in the 1920s as quantum biology. But the problem was is that he was a Nazi. He aligned himself with like Nazi politics, and so as Basil J. Haley points out, his work was not considered acceptable, or um, but but Pascual Jordan, he emphasized the non-commutativity. So when they discovered spin and the one half spin being inherently non-commutative, then he felt corroborated. But the fact is that that non-commutativity exists on the frequency and time level of the photon. And so somebody like Roger Penrose, they realize that the origin of the universe is this non-commutativity. But in standard physics, it's really fascinating because they say, well, the Big Bang, it happened, this singularity happened outside of time and outside of space, or they call it infinite space, but they say we can never measure it because the closer you get to it, there's always more time to measure it. And they use the analogy of trans infinite transfinite mathematics, and this is exactly what the zero theorem is about. In the movie, he's trying to solve this transfinite mathematics, and that's basically set theorem. That mathematics is from George Cantor. And the irony is that George Cantor, he started out in music and he wished he had stayed in music. Um, and that music actually does provide the solution to this problem, because what George Cantor proved was that the irrational number is outside of the provable set theories. So it's a larger infinity than a natural number or an integer, but it's not provable as a larger set. So it's like an unbounded, undefined, transfinite reality. So it's kind of ironic because somebody in standard physics, there's this guy posts on Quora, which is like a science forum on the internet, and this guy Victor Toth, he's a self-taught physicist, but he's got some kind of PhD in like computer science or something, and he's basically like, well, if you look at the number theory, the you can double numbers and then you can have a one-to-one correspondence, and that's what symmetry is in mathematics, is that one-to-one correspondence between the geometry and the arithmetic. And as long as you can set up a one-to-one correspondence, you can prove that you can have a um, you can have a larger infinity because you're lining up the integers with the doubling of the integers, and you're showing that the you can always have a larger infinity of doubling the numbers, and therefore you can always have this infinite space as this process of the mathematics. And it's kind of ironic because when Simon Stevin created logarithmic numbers in the 1600s, his whole argument was that, well, you can never finish the process of the converting the arithmetic to geometry um, as an irrational number, and so therefore you just need to um, contain it as an infinity as geometry. So basically, um, this is what the Dedekind Dedekind ended up calling it the cut, and when he studied set theory, he just called it the Dedekind cut. And so it's like it's the Dedekind cut is actually like the conversion of math to physics. And so there's this deep argument in science, like which is more primary, mathematics as information or physics as matter, as mass. And so when they study the origin of the universe, they're always assuming that in order for time to exist, there has to be mass. There has to be matter for mass. But um, the article light is heavy proves that actually all matter is from photons. It's actually from photons. And that's what Sir Roger Penrose also argues. So you have Gerard de Hooft and Sir Roger Penrose. They both agree that all of matter is actually from photons. In standard physics, that's not recognized. So they say, well, the universe started out with the Big Bang. It was not visible. It was just quarks and protons, and the quarks and the gluon force were not visible, and then light emerged later to be visible. But the photons are can also be virtual photons, and so it's like, well, do they exist or not? And so when you're looking at a singularity as a black hole, what Sir Roger Penrose is basically saying, well, eventually the acceleration of the universe, it all goes into this one final black hole, and and everything, all the matter and mass becomes photons. And so when you get a black hole singularity, as due to the Hawking radiation, it turns into entanglement again. And so then you have this negative frequency and time reversed non-locality at the origin of both the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, and at the acceleration of the universe. And so this is what Roger Penrose, he admits that that is non-commutativity. And so in the movie, the Zero Theorem, that's the big argument, is like, well, his job is to use transfinite mathematics to prove that everything is nothing, um, and nothing matters. And his quest is to find this secret joy and meaning of the universe through joy and love. And he ends up rejecting physical love in order to um, you know try to find this experience he had that was like a transcendent joy beyond physical love. And so it's kind of what like a monk has to do, because a monk has to rely on eventually celibacy, not just celibacy physically but mentally. And um so then the question of, like, what is real, um it's actually through this listening process. So when you're relying on the medium of a film or a visual medium, like modern society It's all based on visual external measurement. So seeing is believing. So people watch movies and they prioritize the visual because two-thirds of our brain is visual perception, but biologically, we actually originate from the listening process and what they call the lateral line in fish. And that sense of listening, the pressure is essentially that same pressure of what they call dark energy in physics. And they don't know what dark energy is, but they're just saying it's basically like gravitational repulsion, repulsive gravity. And when you realize that the magnetic force is from the virtual photons, then you also realize that this repulsive gravity is also the from the virtual photons. And because the virtual photons have a magnetic moment to them, because of that one half spin is also a magnetic moment. And so this is why music and quantum biology as a listening process through meditation, ultimately it bypasses like mathematics and the logical paradoxes of set theory. And this is something I discussed with math professor Luigi Borzacchini. He has a book, it's in Italian, called Plato's Computer, where he discusses all these ideas, but he basically argues, he calls it the negative judgment paradox. And that, it can only be answered in silence as logical inference, which is this listening process. And he agreed that normal reality is actually non-commutative, and therefore the paranormal is actually normal because it's non-commutative. And then what we call normal is this commutative reality, and it goes against biology fundamentally. And so that's the problem with AI, because when you have AI ultimately it's stuck in commutative geometry through the identity matrix, which is zero. And that's what the zero theorem is. Um, so anyway, yeah, it's a pretty cool movie if you understand all the geekiness behind it. Um, and I didn't totally get into the movie. I kind of speed watched it, but that's what I got out of the movie. And so, somebody this book was written by a Mayo Clinic medical doctor, and she co-authored an article with Qigong master Chen Yulin on Qigong in the complementary medical textbook for the Mayo Clinic, and I found it in the University of Minnesota Medical Library, the biomedical library. So she went to go study with an engineer, um, who was it? William Tiller, to try to, you know, discover what is the secret of chi energy, because she experienced, the chi energy from Chen Yulin, and and then she wrote this book pretty recently. But her whole argument is exact opposite of mine. She's arguing that it's all symmetry, that it's all based on balance. And why does she, so she similarly argues that it's ultimately information healing. That because see what as Qigong Master Chen Yulin emphasizes, what makes Qigong difference is that it's not just energy, but it's information. So the energy knows before you do. It knows from the future. So it's always guiding us from the future. And that's why Jim Nance calls it guiding chi. That's his website. He gave me his Bible, and I found when I looked through the Bible, I found the verse. Here's the verse he uses. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. That's Psalms chapter 32. So that's where the guiding chi. comes from. So in a way, that's like the eye of God. But the thing is that that eye, it originates from the logos, where in Genesis it says God said, "Let there be light." And as Westerners, we ignore the verb said and we just focus on the light. Um, but the said comes before the light, and that's what people don't notice when they read the Bible. Because, as Westerners, we're like, seeing is believing. So we focus on the light and we ignore the said part. But if we look at our original human culture, they're relying on music and listening to the source of the music. And in Buddhism, this is called the inner ear method, and considered the best method for modern times, to learn meditation. But and then Ramana Maharshi called it the Muna Samadhi, which is the highest level of samadhi, which just means silence samadhi. And so the secret of that listening process is you always have this yin and yang dynamic going on eternally, with time being eternal. And the negative frequency and the positive frequency are overlapping in number, and this is called the three in one unity. So the three in one unity is the secret of the logos, as from one, two, three, and four. Um, that's as explained in music theory. So that's what my academic article explains: the music theory secret of non-commutativity. And Basil J. Haley, he said that non-commutativity completely changes how we understand quantum biology. So I'm actually relying on, like, actual scientists to make my claim. And I had a hypothesis about music, and then I trained in the non-Western philosophy to test out the hypothesis, and then I went back into science to really study the scientists, like, on a really deep level. And that's how I discovered Basil J. Hiley and Eddie Oceans and Alon Khan, and they're all saying that the truth of reality is this non-commutativity. So this book goes into um, Alon Khan and Basil J. Hiley, but it doesn't. I don't think it mentions Eddie Oceans. And but Eddie Oceans, the only book he has a chapter in this book. Um, and So the irony is that the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, it worked with the Stanford Research Institute, which was a, like, CIA funded research institute in psychology. And the highest level of the CIA is psychological warfare. So that's where you get into, like, the mind control stuff and the military aspects of the paranormal and stuff like that. So that's where science becomes, like, top secret and hidden from the public. And mainstream scientists are supposed to dismiss quantum biology as BS. And Andrei Puharich, he claimed that the reason, that's what the reason it's dismissed as BS and ridiculed is to keep it top secret, to cover it up. And it's kind of interesting. So anyway, that's the sort of the background of the secret of zero is actually the secret of the one, the source of the I thought as the secret of the one. And um yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I enjoyed the movie. Again, I didn't, like, watch it, like, straight through. I didn't totally watch all of it, but um, that's a pretty cool movie. I like Terry Gilliam's movies, 12 Monkeys in Brazil, and that whatever they call that punk thing, the I can relate to it as gutter punk because I lived the gutter punk life. Um, but there's another term for it. Somebody can remind me. I could look it up real quick, but yeah, I'm glad he's from Minnesota. Like the Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's that same kind of aesthetic, like where you combine sci-fi with the retro, the early MST3K out of Minnesota, which has like a sort of like a cult following on the internet. And they just got funded. They did a GoFundMe to do new episodes of that show. But I like the early episodes because they're retro. They don't use all the high tech editing. They rely on the retro props, and that was like Joel Hodgson's original concept. Was pretty much like Terry Gilliam. Um, Steampunk. That's what I'm thinking of. Steampunk. All right. Thanks.